So today we're going to talk about naming simple organic compounds. So whenever you think about naming organic compounds, the names are based on four things. The first thing is the number of carbon atoms. The second thing is the types of bonds that are in the molecule. The third is the functional groups. And the fourth is the geometry. And that's the geometry just of the total molecule. And we're only going to touch on the first three of these here today. We don't need the fourth one. So the first thing we look at when we're naming them is how they're broken up. Because when we name simple organic compounds, we name them using prefixes and suffixes to represent these four different categories. The number of carbon atoms are represented by the prefixes here. And I have all the prefixes listed out. And we'll just go down here and label which number of carbon atoms goes with each of these. There's more after 10. If you need them, you can look them up in tables, but usually 10 is the most you'll deal with probably in your chemistry. The next thing we use is some suffixes, and there's different types of suffixes we can use. The first one that all the namings are going to use is the type of bonds one, and that is here. And that just tells us if we have single, double, or triple bonds in our molecule. So if we have an ane as a suffix, that means that we have all single bonds. If you have an ene, you have at least one double bond. And if you have an ine, you'll have at least one triple. And if you have more than one, then you designate that with a di or a tri in front of them. And the last thing we're going to talk about here today is the functional groups, and that's also another suffix. And the only one we're going to look at today is the functional group of alcohols, and we designate that with the suffix of OL. So now that we have kind of the bare bones of what we need to name organic compounds, we're going to look at an example down here. So what is the chemical formula for octanol? So step one we have is we're going to rewrite the name. And I've kind of split it up a little bit, you can probably see. So we have oct and an ol. So the oct is our prefix. So we look at our list of carbon atoms and we can see we have oct as 8. So that means we have 8 carbon atoms. An here is going to actually be our suffix that tells us our type of bonds. And what that is that's actually an ane there in disguise. So A-N-E. Because whenever you add a functional group, sometimes they'll drop that E. So that means we have all single bonds. And lastly, we have the ol. And like we just said a second ago, that represents alcohols. And alcohols are just things of the functional group of OH attached to one of the carbons. So now we know what our molecule looks like. So let's go ahead and draw it out. So we have 8 carbons. Then we know we have a functional group of an alcohol, so we can add that on. And then the rest of these bonds are going to have hydrogens on them. And just for simplicity, we're just going to represent the hydrogens with those little dash marks. So our last step here is just to count them up. So we're going to count the atoms. So we know we have 8 carbons, so we have C8. We have how many hydrogen here? We have 18 hydrogen, but one trick you have to remember is that we always leave the functional groups together. So we're going to leave that OH as a group. So we only represent 17 hydrogen here. And then we just put our OH at the end. And that's just to remind us that that's a functional group. We don't just have an oxygen attached to a carbon. We have both an oxygen and a hydrogen. And that's how you can name simple organic compounds. If you start with, the name, you can get the formula, and you can even go vice versa.